Hello, I'm Dr. April Grothy, and today we're going to be talking about content analysis. We're going to review the last 5 weeks, and that includes the 6 categories of content analysis: unitizing, coding, computer-aided text analysis, reliability, and writing research proposal and reports. Then what we're going to talk about is a sample article and how well it actually utilizes all these different aspects of content analysis and how well the actual analysis was. So the 6 categories of content analysis, these are extrapolations, which include trends, patterns, and differences; standards, which includes identifications, evaluations, and judgments; indices and symptoms. An index is a variable whose significance rests on its correlation with other phenomena; linguistic representation, that allows readers to create imaginary worlds; conversations, where we understand naturally occurring speech; and institutional processes, where we analyze institutions through communication. Unitizing is to decide what is to be observed as well as how observations are to be recorded and thereafter considered data. So we have the 3 types of units: sampling, where we distinguish them for selective inclusion; recording and coding, these are distinguished for separate description, transcription, or recording and coding; context, where the units of textual matter set limits on the information to be considered. And they have different ways of defining these units, and those are physical, where we partition them by time, length, size, volume, etc. Syntactical, and this is where we partition them by their grammar. Categorical, where we define units by their membership in a certain class or category. Propositional, where we delineate units according to a particular construct. And thematical, where we delineate or connotate the analysis by its story-like verbal materials. Coding actually bridges the gap between texts and someone reading those texts. And the different ways of coding are verbal designation, and that's where we use dictionary definitions; extensional lists, that's where the analyst enumerates all the instances that define each category; decision schemes, each recorded datum is regarded as the outcome of a predefined sequence of decisions; magnitude and scales, where we judge its proper place along a presupposed continuum; simulation of a hypothesis, this is where we look for evidence in favor of or against a stated hypothesis; simulation of interviewing, this is where we obtain answers to questions that could have potentially been asked to the author; constructs of closure, this is where we infer missing parts in order to obtain closure; and record is the computational part of content analysis. So CATA software, these are actually kind of defined in broad categories. We have 3 broad categories. This is the text analysis software, and this is where software essentially works with the raw data, text, words, or character strings. And some of the different text analysis software that we have are ones that account for the character strings, that do text mining, that mine textual evidence for theories, or web graph analysis. Our second category is computational content analysis, and this embodies some kind of theory of the meaning or model. And in this we have coding dictionary approaches, statistical association approaches, semantic network approaches, memetic approaches. Lastly, we have support for quantitative data analysis, and this refers to software that enables single analysts to manage their interpretations of analytically relevant text segments, so they can manipulate text segments. And then we talked about reliability. We talked about 3 different kinds of reliability, or 3 types, and that is stability, which is the degree to which a process is unchanging over time, and that's a retest situation; replicability, and that is the degree to which a process can be reproduced by different analysts working under varying conditions; and that's a test situation, and accuracy, the degree to which a process conforms to its specifications, and that's a test standard situation. And then we talked about various ways of calculating reliability, with Krippendorff alpha being the best as it allows uniform reliability standards to be applied to a great diversity of data. And lastly, we talked about writing research proposals and reports. So in a proposal, we're spelling out the steps that we intend to take and explaining why. We also want to convince the sponsor that the proposed research is beneficial to the sponsor, as well as the fact that we are capable of delivering what we're proposing. The report, in fact, has several steps that should be included in it, and these are abstracts, tables of contents, literature review, description of the design followed, the units, the recording coding process, the results, the references, the appendixes, the acknowledgments of the contributors. There's a long list of things, and this actually can be found right in our textbook as well as online, so that's something that I didn't write out here on this slide for you. So now we're going to look at the sample article, and the one I chose was called Contradictory Messages, a content analysis of Hollywood-produced romantic comedy feature films. So let's review the content analysis of the sample article. So the category that I believe this article follows is linguistic representation, and that is because the study aim was to identify the messages on romantic relationships that adolescents are being exposed to. So what are they being exposed to? And also we want to then analyze those messages and how they infect them. So basically we have adolescents that are getting messages, and what does that message mean to them? So that's linguistic representation. The units that are used are recording coding, and they're defined by category. So the movies were broken down into relationship-oriented observations, each movie. Each incident was then coded, and its unit is then categorized by its similarity with other incidences. The sampling style that I believed was used was relevance, and this is because there are a large number of romantic comedies that are available out there, and so they took steps in order to narrow down the list to the most relevant ones to them. And part of why I believe this is relevance is because this analysis was done in Britain, and therefore the DVDs needed to be able to be viewable in Britain, so they had to be Region 2 DVDs. So any DVD that was not Region 2 could not be included in this analysis. So that's part of one of the reasons why we're talking about relevance. And they also picked dates, and they picked that it had to be with the 6 major Hollywood studios. So overall, the sampling style here was relevance. The coding that I believe was used was decision scheme, and that's because each incident was looked at separately from the rest. It was then placed into a category where it was similar in context and meaning. If the incident didn't fit into any of the current categories, they created a new category for it. So each incident was looked at individually by itself. So we have a decision scheme that was created for the coding. The reliability, I believe that the reliability here was only stability. And that's because a test situation occurred. The initial analysis was done, and the initial coding process was created, and then that analyst asked a second coder to use the codes they came up with in order to establish a reliability. So we have the same analyst in 2 different coders, and the second coder is using the same codes that the first coder created. So I really think that this analyst was trying to create a replicability, reliability, but by this second coder using the same codes that the analysis of the first coder created and having the same analyst, I really do think that this is actually just stability, where we have test, retest. You needed a whole different analyst to then go in and pick out those same movies using those same coding, using the same steps that were created, and then to come up with their own codes and to see if those codes matched in order to create a replicability. For validity, I really think that we have social validity going on here because the public, this is actually something the public is very concerned about. Mothers are very concerned about how movies affect their adolescents, well, and fathers as well. And so they're so concerned about this that I really do believe something comes out that shows signs of being truthful, in which this does, that has some reliability data to it, that they're going to see validity in this because of the social effect of this. And the CATA software that might be used in order to help this. So I think that we have kind of a couple options here. The CATA software that could be used during the very first situation, we might be talking about that coding dictionary approaches where they look through the software. Truly, though, watching the 40 films is probably the best way to do this. But for a second analysis, say I now want to come in and analyze this, I might in fact use a text analysis software, such as one that accounts for character strings, because I can take the text of that movie, put it into my software, and see if I use those same codes that they came up with, see how many instances that it actually shows up in the movie. So we might be able to use a text analysis software in this situation. We are talking about a lot of data, 40 movies. There are a lot of lines in those movies, a lot of text. So I still question that how reliable or how helpful an actual CATA software will be. Then we're going to talk about the research report here. So the point of entry that I believe was taken in this analysis was problem-driven. That's because they noted that there was a problem that adolescents are very impressionable, and they wanted to determine how romantic comedies are affecting adolescents. So they chose this problem, and then they chose the movies utilized to analyze this problem. So I have a long list that I didn't quite write all of them on this slide here, but I have a long list of what was included, and I have a shorter list of what was not included in our research report. So what's included, we have abstract, review of literature, the description of the research design followed, and it actually included some preparatory research undertaken. The body of the text sampled, it included the units, the record and coding process, the techniques employed to reduce the volume of the records, the research results, the references, and a self-critical appraisal of the analysis. What we do not have included is the table of contents. There were no research questions. There was no discussion of any complications that were encountered during the process. There was no appendix, and there was no acknowledgement of contributors to this analysis. So, improvements. I really do think that there's quite a few improvements that could be made overall. This was actually a very good article, but there's kind of a couple things that I think really could use some improvements, and that's the actual data given. And so the actual reliability data, the numbers, all we got was the results. We never actually got any numbers on how they came up with that result. So I can't look at their math to see whether they missed a decimal point here or whether their math was actually done correctly. Also, as we discussed, Krippendorf alpha is the best way to test reliability. So what if I wanted to look at this data and just utilize their numbers and run Krippendorf's alpha? I can't because I don't have the numbers. So I kind of wish there were a little bit more numbers given to us in this so that we can actually look at the reliability data a little closer. And just for reference, if we were in fact using Krippendorf's alpha, the data would be considered a nominal metric, because the values have no particular ordering, and the two values are either going to be the same or they're going to be different. The second part here, research questions. I think this is huge. They didn't actually have research questions that were stated. They did in fact state very significantly what the aims of the paper are, and I really do think that they could have took those aims and created research questions out of them. Instead of saying we aim to do this and we aim to do that, they could have said research question number 1 is this, research question number 2 is that. So I believe that they got close, but they just did not quite reach their research questions. And then I have some qualms with their list of romantic comedy. And the biggest thing here is, what date did they actually obtain this romantic comedy list? And that's important, because if I'm going to repeat this research, I need to know exactly what date they picked it. Because I looked at the website they utilized to pick their data, and that website is kept up to date. So it has romantic comedies from today on it. So if I want to reproduce what they did, then I need to have the date that they actually pulled this list, so that I can drop off these new movies. And along with that, the fact that we don't have the date, I'm curious on their choice of the date range. They chose from 95 to 2005. This article was published in 2009. Adolescents like to watch the newest movies that are out there, so I think that they needed to include the most recent full year. So if this data was produced, or if this analysis was done in 2008, I think that they should have included 2007, because that's the most recent complete year in this analysis. So I'm curious as to why they chose the date range. And then their choice of cutting out the big six producers, I don't agree with that. And this is because if the movie makes it to the top 200 list, then it means it's a popular movie, and it doesn't matter who produced this movie. And in fact, when I again go to that website and I look at today's list, the current #1 romantic comedy is My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which was produced by IFC Studios, which is not one of the big six. And I look down at the top 20, and 3 of the top 20 are not big six movies. So here you have movie #1 currently on our top 200 list that is not included because it was not produced by the big six producers. So I really do believe that if it made it to the top 200, that it is already considered a movie that is seen by a lot of people, that has grossed a lot of money. It is a movie that adolescents have probably watched, and it should have been included. And lastly, I would have actually liked to see this analysis tied to adolescents more. So great that they identified the romantic relationship messages that these movies are showing, but how does this actually affect adolescents? We've done step #1, but I really think that step #2 was missed. So, we don't talk about how many parents are actually letting adolescents watch these types of movies. We don't talk about how these movies are actually affecting adolescents themselves. I think that we could have included this relatively simply into our analysis just by following up, creating a questionnaire that involves the codes we've came up with, and asking adolescents to watch a movie and maybe answering the questionnaire based on these codes. So I really do think that we could have tied a little bit more into adolescents into this analysis, and I would have liked to see that. Overall, though, I read 3 different articles from our content analysis reader, and I really do believe that this was the best of the 3. It had the most data, the most information, told us the most about the way that they did their analysis, and came up with good results. So this is by far the best of the 3 that I read. So for our recap, today we recapped the 6 categories of content analysis: unitizing coding, CATA software, reliability, and writing research proposals and reports. We then looked at that sample article, and I showed how you can use all this information to analyze a content analysis article for how well it was done. And most important thing that I'd like you to actually remember from this is that this is all knowledge that you can use in order to research and write your own content analysis. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Do you have any questions?